As a mental health practitioner for the past 6 years, there's some common themes and patterns that I notice with the South Asian female diaspora. Now, since I only work with adults, usually the age group of women that I talk to are anywhere from about, let's say, 28 to 45, generally speaking. And it doesn't matter if some of these five things have just happened in the last 10 years or if it's been a fairly decent amount of time since these things have occurred. The reason for this being is because one of the biggest emotions that takes up space in us is resentment. Resentment feels like a boundary violation because essentially we're resenting the fact that our wishes, expectations, needs, or desires weren't respected. So let's get into it. First and foremost, because we're talking South Asian diaspora here, we gotta include the gender differential. We gotta include the fact that sometimes there's double standards for us and our male counterparts. Now, earlier on in life, usually this is a sister versus a brother. For example, household chores and duties often fall upon the shoulders of a female offspring, even if she's younger than the male offspring. Other things like curfew, privileges to go out, dress, what we're wearing. Maybe a male offspring's allowed to go on and get his ears pierced or to be wearing the gold jinnies and all that. But for the female offspring, if she shows shoulders or legs, especially if you're an 80s, 90s kid, then it's the end of the world and there's this huge uproar. So sometimes having that from a really young age when you're supposed to just feel psychologically safe with your caregivers can have long-lasting effects that then impacts our self-worth, our confidence, and we've internalized that sexism and gender differential, and it comes out sometimes in the way that we approach colleagues, in how confident we are to go for a promotion, in the way that we might parent going forward. The second thing that usually comes up in therapy sessions when we're digging into the past is the resentment and negative emotions and unmet needs around wedding planning time and introduction to daughter-in-law life. Now, it's no secret, this is a very emotionally charged time. Any transitional phase in your life is gonna have some waves, a little bit of hardships involved. But unfortunately, because of that first thing we mentioned in terms of the gender bias and differential treatment for females, sometimes when you enter a new family system or when you're just doing the wedding planning phase, this is when you start to see the reality of just how strong the patriarchy and male dominant society can be. So let's talk wedding planning time. Because it's glamorized and programmed into the deepest part of your brain that your wedding is the end all and be all of your life as a female, usually, then we have a lot of high hopes and expectations. We've spent a lot of time daydreaming about our wedding day usually. So then come time when it's time for decision making for decor, DJs, wedding color schemes, whatever goes into wedding planning, usually that's when a tug of war ensues. Now, the bride might have certain thoughts and feelings about how she wants things to go about, and then the groom side will have their own thoughts and feelings, but really this is a decoy issue. What's going on beneath the surface is that the bride is starting to get little snippets of how controlled and overpowered she might be in this new family system, and the groom's family is now having to adjust to a new energy coming into the home and a new attention focal point for their brother or their son, which can sometimes create some toxic behaviors and patterns on their end. This can lead to a massive loss in identity, and it can actually be a quite jarring experience to not have that same level of autonomy or decision making that maybe you finally broke through in your own family system at last, now being someone of marital age. Usually then the oppression and the rules kind of ease off and taper off, and then all of a sudden it feels like you regress in life when you're back feeling like an adolescent who doesn't have a lot of say in their own life anymore. So this can be a really, really actually quite traumatizing time period. And that's why we see a lot of content of people complaining about this time of their life, but there's not a lot of resourcing going on. And that's why it's so important to get some counseling therapy to release all these resentments. And we'll talk a lot about why that's so important at the end of this as well. Next up, speaking of tug of wars, we can't leave out the postpartum period because not only are you healing from stitches and the blood loss and all the trauma that goes with birthing and bringing a new life into the world, but then there's also the emotional toll in labor that comes in with trying to make everybody happy, trying to balance expectations, trying to figure out your footing in relationship to this child, where the relationship should be quite clear, but again, that tug of war comes into play. So the postpartum period, because of the hormonal fluctuations, because of the physical changes to your body, the healing process, and then often the cultural and societal pressures that come into play, this can be another heavy time period where a lot of women are harboring resentment and negative emotions that they're keeping all festered and bottled up inside. And then, of course, whatever we repress, the body will somehow express. So a lot of women will report feeling robbed of a bonding opportunity with their child, the attachment and the ability to maybe ward off the baby blues. That opportunity goes away, and in fact all the extra stress and pressure magnifies the chance of then the baby blues transforming into full-blown postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, or sometimes even postpartum psychosis. As I've talked about in previous videos, this is a very serious and unfortunately much too common experience for the South Asian diaspora of women, and definitely something that needs to be talked about and resourced much more than it is. Okie dokie, this is a big one, and maybe it's not applicable to everyone, but chances are it is in one way, shape, or form. How about the resentment that's caused of not fully dealing with or resourcing past transgressions of either a romantic partner or a caregiver? So in youth and infancy, sometimes we see a lot of substance use with our parents, namely our fathers, with alcohol abuse. And sometimes this can lead to having to deal with a lot of emotional instability in the home, a lot of uncertainty, maybe lots of conflict, anger, fear being induced in the offspring because of that alcohol dependency and the strong tendency for a lot of South Asian males to use alcohol as a coping strategy. So none of this ever usually gets talked about. It's just swept under the rug, and then we leave one family system and enter another. The same stuff might be going on there, or more often than not, we end up with a partner who exhibits a lot of these same types of behaviors that we're used to our father exhibiting. So sometimes, yes, it's substance abuse, but unfortunately, infidelity is very common in our culture as well. This can be maybe just due to alpha male macho bravado being glamorized. It's so normalized. There's a lot of boys will be boys talk, especially amongst females, often when they look for support about this topic. And sometimes we do just keep on keeping on and keep a stiff upper lip and tolerate all the stuff going on. But like I mentioned before, whatever we're repressing emotionally, our body will find a way to yell at us and show us what we're repressing through our physical health. And now the biggest common complaint that we see: living a double life and also feeling capped for potential. Now, because of sexism, gender bias, the past transgressions, the substance use, the anger, all the things we talked about prior, sometimes we can feel like we have to split our identity with our Western side and our Eastern side, and there's a huge clash. We can internalize the guilt that we feel because of this. We can also limit ourselves, meaning we don't go for the highest degree because we don't want to feel like a burden financially on our family. Or maybe we don't have the confidence it takes to go for the job promotion, like I mentioned earlier. Maybe we are capping ourselves because we see the way that we're perceived in our family systems. Now, this last one is definitely something that is malleable, not set in stone, not concrete. You can absolutely work on your self-esteem, your self-worth, and your confidence in your relationship with yourself. Just because others weren't able to give it to you doesn't mean you can't create it from within. So I really hope you found this content relevant and relatable and also insightful, and maybe sparking some ideas as to what future goals can be for the remainder of the year. And of course, working with a mental health practitioner is so helpful to not only resource the past, but also plan for the future. So all this stuff, all this emotional baggage and the mental toll that some of these things have taken doesn't hold you back in life anymore. As usual, thank you for watching. See you next time.